Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video, I like to take a little look at how things have gone during the first couple of days of Freedom Week, with more measures against the virus being abandoned than we imagined, a weak pretend threats being issued by the Prime Minister to try and get more people vaccinated, a death toll that's now following the pattern of case and hospitalisation rises as predicted by experts, and a government that's focusing its attention not on the pandemic, but on removing democratic safeguards while we're all distracted. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So on Monday, the Freedom Day, there were a number of things circulating around social media. Footage of nightclubs packed with revellers, and although you can't tell from footage of a load of people in a darkened room, they will have been largely young, unvaccinated citizens, of course. Events like that alone, up and down the country, would power the third wave to even greater heights, and the rate of new cases per day is already high and climbing steeply. One of the problems with getting the public to focus on what's going on is that you have this chain. You have infection, positive test, hospitalisation and death. And not everyone moves from one stage to the next. So from between each stage, you've always got fewer people going to the next. And obviously not everyone, progresses, but also there's a significant delay between each one, which means that when you've got an exponentially growing rate of infection, by the time you start to go, like yesterday, for example, we've had nearly 100 deaths in a single day. Oh, that's bad. Yeah, you go, okay, but that'll be the report from the start of the week, where the weekend there's not as many reported. We know it's not that many died in that day, but you compare it to the previous week and it's nearly double. So, that exponentially rising number of cases, which has been evident for a long time now, then hospitalizations was low, but then hospitalizations started going up, because it's delayed. But then it's, but the deaths are low, and now the deaths are going up, you see. And yeah, they're not going to go to the heights they were in the second wave, but they're still going to go to the point where it will, even at the rate it's going to be killing more people than anything else. And by the time you see that, and that's what the public focus on, of course, the sharp end, it's too late for modest measures to deal with it, because you've got wherever the cases are, the deaths are going to follow at some point. You can't just stop. Oh, that's too much death now. Is it really? Well, you've got another 2 months of it waiting in a queue. Our 7-day moving average of new positive cases per day is 47,000 now. That is an increase of 42% compared to last week. And the cases we're seeing here are before we abandoned all semblance of reason. We haven't got that data yet. We haven't got the data from the results of Freedom Day. Hospitalisation's been following the same pattern for a while. For those who think that it's a small number in hospital still, it's not. There was an ICU consultant trying to explain to people, because people, as you reasonably would think, it's just based on how many people are in ICU. No, it's not. A COVID patient in intensive care is not the same as a heart surgery patient. What's the difference? Well, the difference is they said that, say, someone who'd gone in for major surgery like heart surgery or something needs 2 or 3 days in ICU. A COVID patient needs nearly a week. If they need a ventilator, it's over 2 weeks. If they need kidney support, it's over 4 weeks. See, this is the thing. When a COVID sufferer goes into ICU, they stay there for a lot longer. And what you've got each day is more and more COVID patients going in, but the other ones haven't gone out yet. They're still there. So you end up hitting capacity much sooner than if you had a similar number of people going in for elective surgery. So you get bottlenecks. And as with everything else, once you see it happening, it's too late to stop it. This is why we need to listen to those who can extrapolate data, and less to those who don't even know what extrapolate means. Like the boneheads who were protesting in London on Monday. Were they protesting about the government waving the white flag of surrender to the virus? No. Were they protesting about all the illiberal legislation that the government's ramming through while we're distracted? No. They were protesting against the lockdown. There is no lockdown. More than that, there aren't even non-lockdown measures anymore. There's basically nothing. It's like the government don't even think there's a pandemic. What on earth are they protesting about? And as if that wasn't dumb enough, They were also protesting around Downing Street, apparently, as if they wanted Boris Johnson himself to hear their vented fury. They'd have had to have shouted a bit because he wasn't there. It was all over the national news as well. It's not those who were just paying attention to politics. We knew that Johnson was isolating at Chequers, blew up at the weekend. It's over 40 miles away. So they, as I said at the time, they were protesting against something that doesn't exist to someone who wasn't there. And Johnson's location was also controversial. I don't want to talk too much about this in case it comes up in PMQs today. I mean, there's this video comes out. That'll be going on. I'll talk about that tomorrow. But it would appear that the Prime Minister may have been told he needed to isolate while he was at Downing Street and then travel to Chequers unlawfully. When an MP from the SNP did something similar, when they were told they need to isolate but then decided, well, I don't want to isolate here, I'll just go somewhere else, they had to resign. And what heightens our suspicion that Johnson chose to unlawfully move, because it's not like, well, he'd normally be in Downing Street at this time, but he says he's in Chequers. There's more suspicion than that. You know, that he moved himself from the relatively cramped confines of Downing Street and that god-awful gold wallpaper that keeps falling off to the luxury grace and favour home in the country in 1,000 acres of grounds with an army of staff to look after him. At the press conference, his press secretary, who keeps, trying to defend him, in the space of half an hour was reported as saying that Johnson had travelled to Chequers before Friday, that he'd travelled to Chequers on Friday morning, and that he'd travelled to Chequers on Friday afternoon. I mean, he was doing an awful lot of shuffling back and forwards, wasn't he? At least get your story straight before you let the press in. At least go, right, what we're going to say about this then. Don't change your story while journalists who will pick up on these things are there. Also, why would he have been at Chequers at the time? Parliament is still in session. He was still expected to attend. There was no reason for him to be at Chequers. Now, this will be another case of Johnson failing to follow the rules he expects others to. Then there was the lateral flow fiasco. So lateral flow tests are a bit crap. They don't tell you with any degree of accuracy whether you have COVID or not, which is why it was ridiculous Sajid Javid using one when he had symptoms. But that's not their purpose. It's a relatively cheap test where you don't need a laboratory to get results. You get instant results yourself. The idea is you just take them on spec. You take them regularly without symptoms, just in case. If it tells you you're negative, it doesn't mean you're negative. But, if you weren't taking them at all, you wouldn't know because you haven't got symptoms. If it tells you you're positive, it still doesn't tell you with any great deal of certainty you're positive. But what you do then is you get a PCR test, which is accurate. The benefit is it catches some asymptomatic people and therefore prevents some infection. Some people who just don't know they're infected. Takes them out of the general population. That's the purpose of it. It's all part of the effort. It's not one thing on its own that unlocks it. There's no one thing on its own that unlocks it. It's all part of the effort to suppress the virus. Only on Monday, when they'd never been more important, couldn't get one. You go onto the government website and it directed you to Public Health England. Oh, you need to get them from there. Go to Public Health England, it says, no, you need to get them from this government website. It just sent you back and forth between two sites that had none. We'd run out. Fantastic. Boris Johnson also tried to encourage more young people to get vaccinated by saying, oh, at some point in the future, you're going to need a vaccine passport to get into nightclubs and similar venues. The suggestion is that we're not doing this now because young people haven't had the opportunity to get double jabbed yet. That basically means the nightclubs would be allowed to be open, but there's been no point. So obviously he's saying, right, well, get yourself jabbed now. We're going to bring this vaccine passport in at some point in the future to get yourself a chance to be double jabbed, which remember takes several months. Get yourself sorted now. But it's one of those weak threats that crap parents issue, isn't it? If you don't behave yourself, we're going to turn the car around. No one's ever turned the car around. The thing is that Boris Johnson doesn't care about annoying young people. He doesn't care about annoying them by threatening to issue vaccine passports. He could do that right now, but he doesn't want the nightclubs to go out. But that's what he cares about. Also, because they're not his voter base, he can afford to piss off the youth. That's why he blames them for everything that he can't blame Labour or the EU for. It was their fault we had every wave so far. It will be their fault when we go back into lockdown as well. Absolutely their fault. No question about it. His own MPs are against this vaccine passport, even though it won't affect them. After all, it didn't affect them whether or not kids and teachers wore face masks in school. What did that matter to an ageing Tory MP? Nothing. but we only had guidance for face masks throughout in classrooms for a very short few weeks. Libertarians, they are the death of us. Death of us. No way they are going to allow Johnson to issue vaccine passports, ever. Then we had what might have been the most disgraceful episode yet. News emerging that ministers had contacted major employers to tell them that their workers didn't have to isolate just because the app said so. The app is pinging ridiculous numbers of people now. And it's not because the app is too sensitive. It is because the virus is running rampant. You know, but what they try to say to these major employers, no, your workers, you can tell them to go in. It's just a suggestion that they isolate. It's not legally enforceable. Needless to say, the backlash was massive. Reminded me of Barnard Castle when ministers tried to claim that, of course, you can drive across the country in a car with your family if you think you're seriously ill with COVID, if you believe it's what's best for your nearest and dearest. You know, I remember there was a story at the time in Leeds, a mother with an autistic young child out on a scooter for exercise, and the police said they couldn't be out on the scooter because that was recreation and not a good reason to be out. Disrupting the pattern of an autistic child causing great distress. But Dominic Cummings, around about the same time, he was allowed to disappear off the other end of the country while he believed himself to be seriously ill with COVID. You know, there were denials from ministers that they had been writing to these employers, but it was being widely reported. Then there was a suggestion that certain critical workers don't need to isolate if they are double jabbed. We're not talking about if they test positive. I think we're talking about if they get pinged by the app that they've been in contact with someone. So if you're double jabbed, but you're a critical worker, this is what they were saying, you don't need to. But again, this is not legally the case as I understand it. This is what ministers were saying. And crucially, the government are refusing to say what is a critical worker then. So it's like, well, am I a critical worker? I mean, I know I'm not. But in general, you know, if you work in a supermarket, are you a critical worker? If you're a lorry driver, you're a critical worker. And the reason that the government want to let the virus run free, but they don't want to be held responsible for the consequences. That's why they won't publish this list. If they make the app less sensitive, fewer people will be told to isolate. But that means many more people will become infected, end up in hospital and then the morgue. So the government are a bit hesitant about doing that. They can say that certain workers can go about their business as long as they are double jabbed. But that means the same thing. Because if they've been in contact with someone who's tested positive, some of them will be infected. That is the point of isolating, even if you haven't tested positive. Some of you will have been infected and be infectious. Whatever the government do to water down the very tiny number of measures still left means more cases, more hospitalisations and more death. And it really is that simple. And the problem now is the issue has been so confused because most people aren't going to follow everything that the government say and then follow up their follow-up. They're just going to listen to a message. If they listen to the message that says, if you're a critical worker, you don't have to isolate. Well, they just take that on board. They just imagine to themselves they're a critical worker. They may be. You know, if they hear the message, or the app might be too sensitive, well, they just delete the app. You know, they don't read follow-ups. In their pursuit of keeping the economy going, the government are actually damaging it still further as well, because you're going to have more workers ill. That's worse than having them isolate, because they could be off for even longer then. And when the hapless few of us who can see exactly what's happening saw what was happening here, there seemed to be two types of response as far as I could tell, particularly on Monday. One was from people saying, well, this is surely now going to finish Boris Johnson off. The other type of response was noting that there have been so many things that should have finished him off, and yeah, here he still is. Now, I'm sort of in the latter camp. I've said it before. The things that should have finished Boris Johnson off can finish off his reign of terror, absolutely. But there's a couple of necessary components missing. It's not enough to convince people that Johnson is bringing us death and financial ruin. That's relatively straightforward to demonstrate. The problem is that the Tories and their media have somehow managed to convince people that it would be even worse under Labour. Cannot even begin to work out how people would think this possible, but it is a fact. And if that problem can even be partially solved, then we're in business. Not that Johnson's successor won't be an arsehole themselves, but it is possible they will be less brazen and less likely to get away with things amongst the public. And that's also the second component that's missing. That is why the Conservatives won't get rid of Johnson unless they're absolutely certain that he's going to cost them their seat at the next election. They'd have to be utterly convinced of that it's not going to get better in a few years. Because another reason he's so difficult to shift is that although the party have some clever options for leaders, there are still some, they have none with his baffling ability to get old ladies to love him, even when he says he doesn't mind them dying to the virus. But those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. If you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.